Vampire King saw his ex holding a baby at the bus stop, but didn't know that's actually his child. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get into the story. In the heart of the bustling city, under the glow of neon lights, stood a man who seemed like a stranger to the world, cold, distant, and powerful. This was no ordinary man. He was the Vampire King, a being who had ruled over his kind for centuries. His name was Lucien Voss, a figure as old as time itself, whose eyes held the weight of untold histories. Yet, despite the power he wielded and the kingdoms he had conquered, there was an emptiness within him that nothing could fill. For decades, he had lived alone, his heart locked away after the loss of the woman he had loved. She had been his everything, and when she had died, so too had his capacity for love, until now. On one rainy evening, as Lucien walked the streets of the city, his gaze fell upon something unexpected. Standing at a bus stop, his ex-girlfriend, Amelia, clutched a child to her chest. The sight froze him in place. He had not seen her in years, but her face still held the familiar lines of someone he had once held close. His eyes narrowed, confusion clouding his usually steady composure. Amelia, the woman who had once held his heart, stood there, holding a child who, for reasons unknown to him, seemed to draw him in. Lucien took a step closer, his vampire senses on high alert. The child, a small baby, was wrapped tightly in a blanket, its face hidden from view. Yet, as the rain fell in sheets around them, Lucien felt an unfamiliar pang of something stirring deep within him. What was this feeling? The same feeling he had once felt when he had been with Amelia all those years ago. It was a feeling he had long buried, a feeling that had no place in his world of power and immortality. As he watched from a distance, he could not shake the strange sense of familiarity that washed over him. Amelia looked up just as Lucien stepped forward, her eyes locking with his. The years seemed to disappear in an instant, but what truly caught his attention was the child. Lucien's instincts flared. There was something about the baby, something that called to him, a pull he could not explain. But it was the moment Amelia's lips parted to speak that the truth hit him like a thunderclap. The child in her arms was his. This was his son, his flesh and blood, standing right before him, and yet, he had never known. His mind raced. How had this happened? Why had she kept this from him? He had always believed that part of his life was over, that there could be no more ties to the human world, but now, standing before him, was the living proof of the love they had once shared. His heart, once cold and untouched, began to beat again. He had a son. His emotions were raw, and for the first time in centuries, Lucien felt the stirrings of something he had long forgotten, hope. But as the shock of the moment faded, reality set in. He could not afford to let emotions cloud his judgment. The world he lived in was dangerous, and Amelia and the child were now in danger because of him. He needed answers, and he needed them now. Before he could take another step forward, Amelia turned and fled, the child still clutched to her chest. Lucien watched her go, his mind a whirlwind of confusion and emotions. He had no idea what this would mean for him, but one thing was clear, his life would never be the same again. As Lucien stood frozen at the bus stop, watching Amelia disappear into the rain-soaked night, a storm raged inside him. His mind could barely comprehend what had just unfolded. He had a son, his flesh and blood, standing right in front of him, and he had never known. How could this happen? How could Amelia have kept such an important part of his life from him? He needed answers, and he needed them now. He had always prided himself on control, on knowing everything. Yet now he felt helpless, vulnerable in a way he hadn't been in centuries. He stared at the empty street where Amelia had been moments before. His heart pounded in his chest, the sound deafening in his ears. He had to find her. His instincts kicked in, sharp and clear. She was just a few blocks away, and he could track her down easily. But there was something more, something deeper. This child, his son, had to be protected. Lucien knew that his world was dangerous, especially for someone so innocent. He could no longer remain the distant, emotionless king. As much as he hated to admit it, he was bound to this child now. And to Amelia. Lucien moved quickly, his vampire speed making him a blur in the night. He found her not far from the bus stop, standing near a small, dimly lit cafe. Her shoulders were hunched, as if trying to shield herself from the cold, though the storm had passed. Her eyes were fixed on the ground, the weight of the world heavy on her shoulders. Lucien didn't approach her directly. Instead, he watched from the shadows, his eyes narrowing as he observed her every movement. He could hear her heart beating, steady but with a hint of anxiety. She had been through so much, he could tell. The child was hers, and that much was clear. But what else? Why had she kept him from knowing? His mind raced as he wrestled with the questions that demanded answers. Amelia had been the love of his life, or so he had thought. The last time they had spoken was a painful memory, one he had tried desperately to bury. Their parting had been bitter, filled with hurt and misunderstandings. She had left him, and he had let her go, unwilling to chase after someone who had clearly moved on. But now, with this child, everything had changed. Lucien stepped forward, his presence commanding, and Amelia tensed immediately. She didn't turn to face him, but he could feel the shift in the air as she realized someone was near. Her hand instinctively reached for the baby in her arms, pulling the child closer. Amelia. Lucien's voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, a sharpness that he couldn't mask. She stiffened at the sound of his voice, her breath hitching slightly. Lucien, she whispered, as if she hadn't expected to hear him again. Slowly, she turned to face him, and in that moment, Lucien saw the years of pain and regret in her eyes. He didn't know what to say. He had so many questions, but all of them seemed irrelevant in the face of what was right in front of him. The child, his son. Amelia's eyes flickered to the baby, and then back to him, a silent tension hanging between them. Why didn't you tell me? Lucien's words were quiet, but the weight of them was undeniable. Why didn't you let me know about him? Amelia's gaze dropped again, and for a long moment, there was nothing but the sound of their breathing and the distant hum of the city. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I was trying to protect him, she said, her words fragile, almost broken. From your world. From the danger that comes with being your son. Lucien's heart tightened at her words, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, he was forced to confront the consequences of his existence. He was the vampire king, the ruler of a world that was dark, dangerous, and unforgiving. His son would never have a normal life. He would be hunted, feared, and used by others with their own agendas. Amelia had been trying to protect him from that. But Lucien couldn't help the wave of guilt that washed over him. He had been so focused on his power, on his throne, that he had never considered the possibility that someone would go to such lengths to keep his son safe. You should have trusted me, Lucien said, the words tasting bitter on his tongue. I would have protected both of you. Amelia shook her head, her eyes welling with tears. I couldn't risk it. Not after everything that happened. I couldn't bear to see him live in that world. Lucien took a step closer, his eyes softening as he looked at her. Amelia, his voice was low, almost a whisper. I never stopped loving you. She looked up at him, and for a brief moment, there was a flicker of something in her eyes, something that spoke of the past, of the love they had once shared. But it was fleeting, disappearing as quickly as it had come. She turned away, wiping away the tear that had escaped down her cheek. You need to leave, Lucien. It's too dangerous for you to be here. Lucien's jaw tightened. He had never been one to be told what to do, especially by someone who had once been the center of his world. I'm not leaving, he said firmly. Not without you. And not without him. The air between them was thick with tension, but Lucien knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going anywhere. His life had just changed forever, and he would do whatever it took to protect his son. Lucien stood still as Amelia's words echoed in his mind. He had never stopped loving her, but the years of distance had built walls between them that were hard to tear down. He had spent centuries building a life of power and control, yet none of it mattered now. The truth about his son had shaken him to the core. But more than that, it had made him realize how much he had lost, how much he had given up in his pursuit of immortality and control over his kingdom. Amelia was right. The world he lived in was dangerous. His world. And now, it was her world too, whether she wanted it or not. He couldn't protect them if they remained apart. He couldn't protect his son if he stayed in the shadows. You don't get it. Amelia said, her voice barely a whisper as she turned away. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the baby in her arms. This life, it's not for him. It's not for you either. Lucien's eyes softened, but he didn't move. He couldn't leave her. Not now. Not after everything that had happened. I'm not leaving. I'll protect you both. Amelia sighed, her breath catching as she glanced at the baby. Her eyes held a mixture of fear and hope, and Lucien couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. He hadn't been there when she had needed him, when she had needed someone to fight by her side. And now he had come too late. You can't just step back into our lives like this, she said, the words laced with pain. You have no idea what you're walking into. Lucien took a step closer, his presence commanding yet gentle. He reached out, his hand hovering near her arm, but not quite touching it. I know more than you think. He paused, searching her eyes for some sign that she might. Let him in. I don't know what happened between us, but I'm not letting the same mistakes happen again. Not with him. Not with you. Amelia looked down at the child in her arms, her expression softening for the first time. The baby, a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket, slept soundly, unaware of the storm that was about to unfold around him. His name is Adrian, Amelia said, her voice barely above a whisper. Adrian Voss. Lucien's heart skipped a beat. His son, his flesh and blood. He looked at the baby, feeling a sense of responsibility he had never known before. Adrian, he repeated softly. The name felt foreign yet familiar at the same time. He's mine. Amelia nodded, her eyes filled with sadness. He's yours, Lucien. And I kept him from you because I wanted to protect him. From everything. From your world. From the dangers of being the vampire king's son. Lucien's chest tightened at her words. He knew the dangers she spoke of. He had seen them firsthand. The treachery. The lies. The constant battle for power. But none of that mattered now. Adrian was his son, and he would protect him, no matter the cost. I will never let anything happen to him, Lucien said, his voice firm, yet tender. I swear it. The tension in Amelia's face eased slightly, but she still hesitated. Lucien, you don't understand. The moment you step back into our lives, everything changes. It's not just about us anymore. It's about your kingdom. Your people. Lucien's expression darkened. My kingdom is nothing without you. Without him, I will not let anyone take him from me. Amelia's eyes flickered with a mix of fear and uncertainty. You don't know the enemies you're dealing with. You don't know what they'll do to get to you to get to him. Lucien stepped forward, closing the distance between them. I know more than you think. I've lived through wars. Betrayals. I've seen the darkest parts of this world. But I've never had anything worth protecting until now. I will fight, Amelia. I will do whatever it takes to keep you both safe. For the first time, Amelia's eyes softened with something like hope. And if they come for him, Lucien's jaw tightened. They will find out that they've made a mistake. Amelia looked at him, her gaze unreadable. I won't let you bring danger to our door again, Lucien. I won't. Not after everything we've been through. Lucien nodded, understanding her fear. He had done things in the past that could never be undone. But he would make things right. He would prove to her that he was not the same man he had been when they parted ways. I know, he said softly, but I'm not asking you to do this alone. We're in this together now. I promise. Amelia took a deep breath, her hand gently cradling Adrian's tiny head. The weight of their shared history hung heavily between them. But there was something else now, a new beginning. All right, she said quietly. But you have to understand. This isn't just about us anymore. It's about him. He's the one who matters now. Lucien looked at the sleeping child in her arms. Adrian. His son. The future of everything he had ever fought for. I won't let anyone hurt him, Lucien vowed again. Not ever. As the night continued to settle over the city, Lucien and Amelia stood in the quiet, their fates now intertwined by a bond that neither could break. The world was about to change for all of them, and they would face it together. The following days felt like a whirlwind. Lucien spent his time with Amelia and Adrian, trying to make sense of the situation. The truth of his son's existence had upended everything he thought he knew about his life, and now, the future seemed uncertain. He had been a ruler for so long, standing alone at the top, controlling his kingdom with an iron fist. But now, standing beside Amelia, holding his son, he felt something he hadn't felt in centuries: vulnerability. The city outside was bustling as usual, but inside the quiet apartment where Amelia had been living, time seemed to slow. Lucien could hear the steady beat of Adrian's heart, feel the warmth of Amelia's touch as she carefully cradled their child. There was a peacefulness here, but it was fragile. Lucien knew that the moment word got out about Adrian's existence, things would change. His son would be a target, not just for the enemies he had in his own kingdom, but for anyone seeking to undermine his rule. And he couldn't allow that. He couldn't risk losing everything again. Amelia seemed to sense his unease. "You're thinking about the kingdom, aren't you?" she asked one evening, her voice soft as she looked at him across the small, dimly lit room. Lucien didn't answer immediately. He could feel the weight of the world on his shoulders, but the truth was, she was right. It was the only thing on his mind. "I have to protect him," Lucien finally said, his voice heavy with the weight of his responsibility. "I can't let anyone get to him. I won't make the same mistake again." Amelia sighed, her expression a mixture of frustration and concern. "You don't understand, Lucien. The world you're trying to protect him from is already here. He's not just some pawn in your war. He's a person. He deserves a chance to live, to be normal." Lucien's eyes darkened as he met her gaze. "Normal?" he repeated, the word foreign on his tongue. "You think that's possible? You think I can give him that?" Amelia's eyes softened, but there was still a fire in them. "I know it's not easy, Lucien, but you can't control everything. You can't control him." There was silence between them for a moment, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that spoke volumes. Lucien had always been a man of control, a man who lived by rules and structure. But here, with Amelia and Adrian, he was confronted with something he had never learned to control, his own emotions. His thoughts were interrupted when a sudden knock on the door broke the stillness. Lucien's instincts immediately went on high alert. His hand moved to the side, where the silver handle of a hidden blade lay, but Amelia was quicker. "I'll get it," she said, standing up from the couch and walking toward the door. Lucien followed her, his senses sharp. When Amelia opened the door, the sight of the visitor caught him off guard. A man, tall and dark-haired, stood there, dressed in a long coat, his eyes calculating. He didn't look like a normal visitor. He had the presence of someone used to being feared. "I'm sorry to interrupt," the man said, his voice smooth but carrying an edge. "But I have a message for the Vampire King." Lucien stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "Who sent you?" The man didn't flinch. "A mutual acquaintance. I was told you would want to hear this." Without waiting for an invitation, the man stepped into the room, his eyes scanning the apartment briefly before resting on Lucien. "There are people looking for your son," the man said bluntly, his words cold and calculating. Lucien's heart skipped a beat. "Who?" he demanded. "You don't need to know that," the man replied, his voice lowering. "What matters is that you need to make a decision. The longer you hide him, the more dangerous it becomes. They will stop at nothing to get to him. To get to you." Lucien's hands tightened into fists, his eyes flashing with rage. He didn't care who the man was, or who had sent him. The message was clear, his son was in danger. And he wasn't about to let anyone threaten him again. "What do you want?" Lucien asked, his voice dangerous now. The man's lips curled into a cold smile. "You already know what to do. It's simple. Give them what they want, or they will come for him. And I don't think you want that." The words hit Lucien like a blow to the chest. He had always been the one giving the orders, the one in control. But now, for the first time in his life, he was being forced to make a choice that he didn't want to make. Amelia's voice broke the tension. "Lucien, don't listen to him. He's just trying to manipulate you." Lucien turned to her, his jaw set. "I know, but he's right about one thing. They will come for Adrian. They will come for both of you if I don't act." The man at the door gave a single nod. "Good. You understand the stakes now. The question is, what will you do about it?" Lucien took a deep breath, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. His kingdom, his people, his son, everything was in the balance. He couldn't afford to fail again. He couldn't let history repeat itself. "Leave," Lucien said coldly, his gaze locking with the man's. "Tell whoever sent you that I'm not afraid to fight, and I will protect my family." The man's smile widened. "I'm sure you will." With that, he turned and walked out, leaving Lucien and Amelia in the tense silence that followed. As the door closed behind him, Lucien's gaze lingered on the baby in Amelia's arms. Adrian, his son. And in that moment, Lucien made a vow to himself. No matter the cost, no matter the danger, he would not lose his family again. Lucien spent the next few days in a haze of tension and preparations. The warning from the stranger had shaken him more than he wanted to admit. It was clear that his enemies were closing in, and his son, Adrian, was now the center of their attention. The weight of being a father, something Lucien never imagined he would experience, felt overwhelming at times. He had always been in control of everything, but this new reality was different. His family was no longer just a distant part of his past. Amelia, his ex-lover, and Adrian, his son, were now at the very center of his life. The stakes had never been higher. Every decision he made now had a ripple effect. The walls of the apartment felt too small for the kind of battle Lucien was preparing for. Outside, the city pulsed with life, oblivious to the dark forces moving in the shadows. The city had never felt as dangerous as it did now. Every stranger he passed on the street, every vehicle that drove by, seemed like a potential threat. He had to protect them. He had to protect Adrian. As the night fell, Lucien stood at the window of the small apartment, looking out over the city. The darkness was a comfort to him, something he had always known. But tonight, the shadows felt different. They felt suffocating. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft sound behind him. Amelia. She had come to stand next to him, her eyes weary but determined. She didn't need to say anything. He could feel the anxiety radiating off her. They were both caught in this world, one that neither of them had asked for. But now, it was too late to turn back. What do we do now? Amelia asked, her voice soft yet filled with the weight of the question. Lucien turned to face her, his expression unreadable. We fight, he said simply. We fight to protect Adrian. We fight to keep him safe. No one is taking him from us. Amelia looked at him, her eyes searching his face. There was fear in her gaze, but also something else, something like trust. Trust that Lucien would protect them. Trust that, no matter what happened, he would do everything in his power to keep them safe. But Lucien knew that wasn't enough. He couldn't do this alone. I need to talk to someone, Lucien said suddenly, his tone shifting. Someone who can help us. Amelia raised an eyebrow, clearly curious. Who? Lucien didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned away from her, looking back out the window. There was a figure in his past, someone who had once been both an ally and an enemy. They had crossed paths in the past, and although their relationship had always been fraught with tension, Lucien knew that this person had the power to help. It wasn't a decision he made lightly. But time was running out. The longer they waited, the more dangerous the situation would become. And Lucien wouldn't allow that. He wouldn't risk Adrian's life. I have to go, Lucien said, his voice low but steady. Amelia frowned, concern flashing in her eyes. Go where? Lucien met her gaze, his expression hardening. There's someone I need to see. Someone who can help us prepare for what's coming. What are you planning? Amelia asked, her tone sharp. Lucien hesitated for a moment, but he knew he had to be honest with her. I'm going to confront them. I'm going to make it clear that no one is to touch my son. No one. Amelia's face tightened with worry. Lucien, you don't know what you're dealing with. These people are dangerous. Lucien stepped closer to her, his eyes unwavering. I know exactly who they are, and I know what they're capable of. But they've made a mistake. They've underestimated me, underestimated my family, and that will be their downfall. Amelia shook her head, but Lucien could see the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. This is madness. You can't do this alone. Let me help you. Lucien paused for a moment, his gaze softening. He reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder. I know you want to protect him too, but this is my fight now. I can't drag you into it any further. Amelia looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and determination. You're not dragging me anywhere. You're asking me to trust you. And I do. But don't forget, Lucien, we're in this together now. I'm not going anywhere. Lucien's chest tightened. For a moment, he wanted to pull her into his arms, to protect her and Adrian from everything. But the truth was, he couldn't shield them from what was coming. He had to face it head on. And that meant confronting the people who would stop at nothing to destroy them. We'll do this together, Lucien said finally. But I'm going first. I need to make sure everything is in place. Amelia nodded, though her worry was evident. Be careful. Lucien smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. I always am. With that, he turned and walked toward the door, his mind focused on the task ahead. He had no idea what he was about to face, but one thing was certain. He would fight with everything he had. He would not let anyone take Adrian from him. As Lucien stepped out into the night, the weight of his mission pressed heavily on his shoulders. He knew the road ahead would be dangerous, but he was ready. He had come this far, and he wouldn't stop until his family was safe. The night was darker than usual as Lucien made his way through the city streets, the cold air biting at his skin. His mind raced with thoughts of his son, Adrian, and the promise he had made to protect him. The shadows of his past were beginning to creep up on him, and he couldn't ignore them any longer. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. He had no choice but to confront his enemies head-on. Every step he took was measured, deliberate. He couldn't afford to make mistakes. As the Vampire King, he had faced countless threats in his centuries of life, but this was different. This wasn't just about power or control, this was about his family. His son. The stakes had never been higher. Lucien's eyes scanned the dark alleys as he passed them, instinctively on alert. He had dealt with betrayal before, but this time it was personal. This time, there was someone who depended on him, Adrian. Lucien had spent years building his empire, but now, everything seemed so fragile. Amelia, his ex-lover, had become an integral part of his life again, not just because of their past, but because of the future they had to face together. He needed to protect her, too. Without her, Adrian would have no one. Lucien arrived at the location, a discreet warehouse on the edge of the city, a place he knew all too well. This was where the underworld met the shadows, where deals were made, and lives were bought and sold. The man who could help him was here. As Lucien stepped inside, the air grew heavier, the scent of damp wood and old leather filling his senses. He was met by a man, tall and lean, his face obscured by the low light. "Lucien," the man said, his voice rough but respectful. "I knew you would come." Lucien nodded, not bothering with pleasantries. "You've got the information I need," he said, his tone sharp, authoritative. The man didn't hesitate. "Yes, but it's not just information you need. It's power. The kind that will keep your son safe." Lucien's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" The man smiled faintly. "There are enemies out there who don't just want to kill you, Lucien. They want to break you. They want to destroy everything you've built, and they know your son is the key." Lucien's pulse quickened. He had suspected as much, but hearing it out loud, in such blunt terms, made it real. His enemies knew about Adrian. They would use him as a pawn to take down everything Lucien had fought for. "What do you suggest?" Lucien asked, his voice colder than before. "You're going to have to make a choice," the man replied, his eyes glinting in the dim light. "Either you give them what they want, your son, or you fight for him. And fighting, Lucien, means embracing your past, your true power. Not just the Vampire King, but everything you've tried to suppress. You'll need every ounce of strength you've got." Lucien clenched his jaw. He had spent so long trying to distance himself from the darker aspects of his nature, but now, it seemed there was no way around it. He would have to face it all. For Adrian. For his family. "And if I choose to fight?" Lucien asked. The man's smile widened. "Then you'll need me. And you'll need every ally you can find. But you won't be alone. I can help you gather the forces you need, but only if you're ready to face what comes next." Lucien stood still for a moment, considering the man's words. There was no turning back. He had already made his choice. He would fight, not just for his kingdom, but for Adrian's future. He would not let his son be used as a weapon. The man's expression softened, a flicker of understanding passing between them. "Very well," Lucien said, his voice filled with determination. "Give me what I need. I will prepare for war." The man nodded, moving to a table covered in maps and documents. "I'll get it to you," he said. "But know this. Once you begin this path, there's no going back. It will change everything. You'll be forced to confront your darkest fears." Lucien's gaze hardened. "I've already confronted my darkest fears. This is for my son. Nothing else matters." The man didn't respond, but Lucien could see the respect in his eyes. For all his power, Lucien had never felt more vulnerable. This wasn't just about a battle for the throne. This was about survival. And the cost would be high. As Lucien turned and made his way toward the exit, he felt a surge of power that he hadn't felt in years. The road ahead would be perilous, but he was ready. He would protect Adrian, and he would take down anyone who threatened his family. His empire, his son, it was all on the line now. And Lucien was willing to risk everything to keep them safe. The battle had only just begun, and he was prepared to fight with everything he had. Lucien stood in the dimly lit room, the weight of his decisions pressing down on him. His meeting with the mysterious man had left him with more questions than answers, but one thing was certain. His enemies were closing in. They knew about Adrian, and they would stop at nothing to get to him. Lucien clenched his fists, the urge to protect his son burning in his chest. He had never been more aware of the danger surrounding them. Every move he made now would be calculated, every decision pivotal. The stakes were higher than they had ever been, and Lucien wasn't sure if he was ready for what was to come. He couldn't afford to show weakness, not to his enemies, and certainly not to Amelia. She had placed her trust in him once more, and he could not let her down. As he made his way back to the apartment, his thoughts swirled with the weight of the impending battle. What if he couldn't protect them? What if his enemies were too powerful? No, he couldn't afford those doubts. He would fight. For Adrian. For Amelia. Lucien arrived at the apartment to find Amelia sitting in the living room, Adrian nestled in her arms. She looked up as he entered, her eyes filled with concern, but also determination. "Lucien, we need to talk," she said softly, her voice calm yet firm. Lucien could feel the tension between them. They were standing on the precipice of something monumental, and he could feel the gravity of the situation in every fiber of his being. He knew they couldn't avoid the inevitable any longer. He couldn't keep her in the dark, not about the danger they were facing. "Amelia, he started, but she interrupted him, her voice rising slightly. "I know what you're planning to do. You're going to fight them. You're going to fight for Adrian. But Lucien, what if it's not enough? What if they come for him anyway?" Lucien's heart tightened at her words. He could see the fear in her eyes, and he hated that she had to carry that burden. But there was no turning back now. "I'm going to do whatever it takes to protect you both," he said firmly, stepping closer to her. "I'm not running. I'm not hiding. I will fight. I swear it." Amelia shook her head, a mixture of sadness and fear on her face. "But Lucien, you can't do this alone. You need help. We need allies. And you can't keep pushing me away, thinking you can protect us by yourself." Lucien paused, her words hitting him harder than he expected. He had always believed that he could handle everything alone, that he was the only one who could protect those he loved. But now, with Adrian in the picture, everything had changed. "You're right," he admitted, his voice softer than before. "I can't do this alone." Amelia looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. "Then let me help you. We're in this together, Lucien. Don't shut me out." Lucien exhaled slowly, the weight of his responsibility lifting just a little as he looked at her. "I don't want to shut you out. I never have," he said quietly. "But this world, this life, it's dangerous. And I don't want you or Adrian to get caught in the crossfire." She met his gaze, her expression resolute. "We're already caught in it, Lucien. We've been caught since the moment you walked back into our lives. So let's face it together." Her words resonated deeply within him. He had spent so long running from the consequences of his past, from the darkness he had left behind. But now, he couldn't keep running. He had to confront it, to face whatever came next. And he wasn't going to do it alone. "Together," Lucien said, his voice steady. "We'll face this together." As he said the words, a sense of resolve settled within him. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't thinking about his kingdom or the enemies at his gates. He was thinking about his family, about Adrian, about Amelia, and for them, he would fight. The room felt smaller than ever, but it also felt like home. With Amelia and Adrian by his side, Lucien felt a strength he hadn't known in centuries. His son, the one he never knew he had, was now his greatest motivation. He would protect Adrian, no matter the cost. He would fight to the end, and he would make sure no one would ever threaten his family again. Lucien turned to leave, but Amelia's voice stopped him. "Lucien, one more thing." He paused and looked back at her, his brow furrowed in confusion. "What is it?" "You don't have to do this alone anymore," she said softly. "I'm with you, no matter what happens." Lucien's heart swelled with a mixture of emotions. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was carrying the weight of the world on his own. With Amelia by his side, he felt like there was a chance to make things right. And for Adrian, he would do anything to protect that chance. The night seemed to stretch on endlessly as Lucien prepared for the battle ahead. He had always been one to plan meticulously, but this was different. This time, there was more at stake than just his kingdom. This time, he was fighting for his family, for Adrian, for Amelia. The weight of the situation pressed down on him with each passing hour. He had made promises, but the truth was, he wasn't sure if he could keep them. Amelia had insisted on being by his side, and Lucien knew she was right. He couldn't do this alone. As the hours passed, Lucien and Amelia gathered what few allies they could. They moved cautiously, aware of the dangers lurking in every shadow. It wasn't just his enemies who were a threat. It was the very world they lived in. A world where his son, his blood, was a target for anyone seeking to undermine him. Lucien paced back and forth in the small, dimly lit room, his mind racing. The plan was set, but there were so many unknowns. His enemies were unpredictable, and there was always a chance they would strike before he was ready. But Lucien couldn't afford to wait any longer. Adrian's safety was on the line, and he had already waited too long. The sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway outside, drawing Lucien's attention. He turned to Amelia, who had been quietly preparing for what was to come. "It's time," he said, his voice low but steady. Amelia nodded, though her expression remained a mix of worry and resolve. She knew the risks. They both did. But there was no turning back now. "We're ready," she said quietly. Lucien gave a brief nod, his eyes hardening as he steeled himself for what lay ahead. He had never been one to shy away from a fight, but this was different. This wasn't just about him. This was about the future of his family, and he would do anything to protect that future. As they stepped out into the hallway, Lucien's mind raced with strategy. He had always been the one in control, always the one making the decisions. But now, he had to trust others. He had to trust Amelia, and he had to trust the few allies they had gathered. They reached the back exit of the building, where a dark car waited for them. Lucien glanced at Amelia before opening the door and sliding into the back seat. He felt the weight of her gaze on him as she followed him in, sitting close but not quite touching. They were both silent as the car sped through the city streets, the night air thick with tension. Lucien's thoughts kept returning to Adrian, the baby, his son, who had no idea of the danger surrounding him. He had only just begun to understand what it meant to be a father, and already, the world was trying to take everything from him. But Lucien would not let that happen. He couldn't. As the car neared their destination, Lucien's grip tightened on the armrest. They were close now, so close. He could almost feel the presence of his enemies, lurking in the shadows, waiting for their chance to strike. He couldn't afford to be careless. Amelia leaned forward slightly, her voice soft but steady. "Lucien," she began, her eyes searching his face. "Are you sure about this? There's no going back once we're in." Lucien met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "I'm sure," he said firmly. "This is the only way to protect Adrian. To protect us." Amelia looked at him for a long moment, her expression softening. "Just be careful," she said quietly. Lucien nodded, his jaw tightening with determination. He had always been careful, but this time, his caution had to be more than just strategy. It had to be about something bigger than himself. It had to be about his family. The car came to a stop in front of an old building, its windows dark and uninviting. Lucien knew the place well. It was a hub for the underground world that had always existed just out of sight. A place where deals were made, secrets were traded, and lives were taken. The perfect place for an ambush. Lucien's instincts flared, but he kept his composure. He knew what had to be done. They couldn't show weakness. Not now. Not when everything was on the line. He stepped out of the car, followed closely by Amelia. Together, they made their way to the entrance of the building, their footsteps echoing in the empty street. As they approached the door, Lucien's hand instinctively went to the hidden blade at his side. He wasn't taking any chances. When the door opened, a figure stepped into the doorway, blocking their path. It was a man Lucien recognized immediately, one of his old allies, or so he thought. "Lucien," the man said with a cold smile, his eyes glinting in the dim light. "I see you've come to play the game after all." Lucien's gaze hardened. "What's this about?" he demanded. The man's smile widened, but there was something dangerous in his eyes. "It's about the future, Lucien, and what you're willing to sacrifice to protect your family." Lucien took a step forward, his expression unwavering. "I'll sacrifice whatever it takes." The man's eyes flickered with something unreadable. "Good, because you're going to need all the power you can get." With a wave of his hand, the door behind him opened, revealing a dimly lit room filled with shadows. Lucien didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, Amelia close behind him, ready to face whatever awaited them. This was it. The moment he had been preparing for. The moment that would decide the future of his family. The room was cold, the air thick with tension. Lucien stood at the threshold, his eyes scanning the shadows that filled the space. His hand was on the hilt of his blade, ready for anything. The man in front of him, a former ally now turned foe, stepped aside, allowing them entry. The door creaked shut behind them, sealing them inside. The only light came from a few flickering candles, casting long, distorted shadows against the walls. Lucien could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. Every step forward brought him closer to the fight he had been avoiding for so long. He wasn't just fighting for control anymore. He was fighting for his family. For Adrian, the man who had led them here, a shadow of the figure Lucien once trusted, stood still, watching him. So, here we are, the man said, his voice cool and detached. You've come to claim your son, I see. Lucien's jaw tightened. I've come to protect him, he corrected. And anyone who tries to hurt him will regret it. The man's lips curled into a mocking smile. Bold words, Lucien. But do you have the strength to back them up? Lucien didn't answer. Instead, he took a step forward, his gaze unwavering. His mind raced with strategies, but his instincts were sharper than ever. He had spent years building his power, but now, everything came down to one moment. One chance to protect the only family he had left. The man motioned to the center of the room, where a table stood, covered in maps and documents. You're not the only one with a plan, Lucien, he said, his tone dripping with a mix of arrogance and certainty. I've been preparing for this moment for a long time. Lucien's eyes narrowed. I'm not interested in your plans, he said coldly. I'm here for my son, and I won't leave without him. The man laughed, but there was a darkness in his eyes. You think it's that simple? You think you can just walk in here and take him? He took a step closer, his voice lowering too. A dangerous whisper. You don't understand what's at stake, Lucien. This isn't just about power. It's about survival. Your son is the key to everything. Lucien felt a surge of rage. Don't talk about him like that, he growled. You don't know anything about him. The man raised an eyebrow. I know enough. And I know what you're willing to do to keep him safe. Lucien's hand clenched around the blade's hilt, but he held back. He couldn't afford to lose control, not now. Not when everything was on the line. I'm not here to fight you, Lucien said, his voice steady despite the tension building inside him. I'm here to take my son and leave. You can walk away, or you can face the consequences. The man's expression flickered with something close to uncertainty, but it was gone in an instant, replaced by a cold, calculating stare. You don't understand, Lucien. You can't just walk away. The moment you took that child into your life, you sealed his fate. And yours. Lucien's eyes hardened. I will not let anyone use my son as a pawn in their games. The man smiled, a cruel, knowing smile. We'll see about that. As the words left his mouth, the room seemed to grow colder, the shadows deepening. Lucien's instincts screamed at him to be ready, but before he could react, the man moved. In an instant, the room filled with figures, emerging from the shadows like predators closing in on their prey. Lucien drew his blade, the steel gleaming in the dim light. His eyes scanned the room, calculating, assessing the threat. There were too many of them, but it didn't matter. He would fight. He would die if he had to, but he would not let anyone take Adrian from him. Amelia's voice broke through the tension. Lucien, she called, her voice filled with fear and determination. Lucien, don't do this. We can't win like this. We need to get out now. Lucien didn't look at her. He couldn't. He knew she was right. They were outnumbered, and if they stayed, they wouldn't leave alive. But something in him refused to retreat. He couldn't abandon the fight, not when his son was in danger. He took a step forward, his blade raised, ready to strike. But then, a voice from the back of the room stopped him cold. Enough, the voice. Commanded, powerful, and unwavering. The figures around them froze. Lucien's heart raced. He knew that voice. It was a voice from his past, one he had hoped never to hear again. Slowly, the shadows parted, and a figure stepped forward. The air seemed to shift as the figure emerged, tall and imposing, with an aura of power that was unmistakable. It's been a long time, Lucien, the figure said, his eyes locking with Lucien's. But it seems you've forgotten who holds the real power here. Lucien's hand tightened on his blade, but he remained silent. The figure smiled, a cruel, knowing smile. You've been playing in my territory for far too long, Lucien. And now, you've made the ultimate mistake. Lucien's heart pounded. He had known this day would come, but he hadn't expected it to come like this. Not with Adrian's life hanging in the balance. You can't have him, Lucien said, his voice low and dangerous. I won't let you. The figure's smile faded, replaced by a look of cold amusement. You don't have a choice. The tension in the room was unbearable, but Lucien stood firm. He would not let anyone take his son. Not now. Not ever. Lucien's heart raced as the figure before him stepped into the light, the air growing colder with each passing moment. He had hoped this day would never come, that he could protect his family without having to face his past. But now, standing in front of him was someone he had once called an ally, someone who had now become an enemy. A man who had once been a powerful force in Lucien's life, now turned against him. His name was Vance, and he was one of the oldest vampires Lucien had ever known. A being who had been alive almost as long as Lucien himself, and whose ambitions were just as vast. Vance had always wanted more power, more control, and now, it seemed, more of Lucien's family. You're not welcome here, Vance, Lucien said, his voice steady, despite the fury building inside him. Vance smiled, the expression cold and calculating. I'm here for what's mine, Lucien, and I'm not leaving without it. Lucien clenched his fists, every muscle in his body tensed. Adrian is mine. You won't touch him. Vance's eyes gleamed with malice. He's not just yours, Lucien. He's the key to everything. The key to the future. The future I've been planning for. Lucien's mind raced. What did Vance mean by that? What did Adrian have to do with any of this? You've been playing this game for far too long, Lucien, Vance continued, his voice low and mocking. You've surrounded yourself with lies, and now, it's time to pay the price. Your son is the last piece I need to finish what I've started. Lucien's gaze darkened, the weight of the situation settling heavily on his shoulders. He had been living in the shadows for so long, but now, with Adrian in the picture, there was no way to hide. He had a family to protect, and that meant taking action. Vance wasn't going to walk away from this, not without a fight. You've underestimated me, Vance, Lucien said, his voice cold and full of authority. And you've underestimated my son. No one is taking him from me. The room seemed to grow colder as the tension between them built. Amelia, standing behind Lucien, was silent but resolute. She had always known what kind of world they lived in, but now it felt more real than ever. Vance raised an eyebrow, his expression twisting into something darker. You don't understand, Lucien. This isn't about you or me anymore. This is about something bigger. Adrian is the key to a new era. An era where the old vampires, people like me, will rule again. And you're too weak to stop it. Lucien took a step forward, his jaw clenched, his eyes burning with fury. I'm not weak. And I will fight to my last breath to protect my son. The air crackled with tension, and for a moment, it felt like the entire room was holding its breath. Vance took a slow, deliberate step toward him, the smile never leaving his face. You'll fight, but it won't matter. You can't protect him from what's coming. He's already a target. And no matter how hard you try, you won't be able to shield him from the truth. Lucien's heart tightened. He didn't understand. What truth was Vance talking about? What was so important about Adrian that they would go to such lengths to take him? You don't have to do this, Vance, Lucien said, his voice low and controlled, though the anger seethed beneath the surface. We can end this without bloodshed. Vance's eyes narrowed, his smile fading. It's too late for that. The blood has already been spilled. And now, the only thing left is for you to watch your world burn. Lucien's instincts flared, and without another word, he moved. The fight was inevitable. His body was a blur of motion, and his blade came down in a flash of silver. Vance was fast, faster than most, but Lucien was faster. The clash of steel echoed in the room, the sound of metal scraping against metal sending a shock wave through the air. They fought with a ferocity that seemed almost inhuman, each strike calculated, each move a step toward domination. Lucien's mind was focused entirely on the battle before him. He couldn't afford to lose. Not now. Not when everything he had fought for was on the line. Vance was relentless, his attacks coming in quick, powerful bursts. But Lucien was determined. His son's future was at stake, and nothing, not even Vance, could stand in his way. The battle raged on, each moment pushing Lucien further to the edge. He could feel the weight of his past bearing down on him, but he couldn't let it control him. Not now. He had to push forward. He had to protect Adrian. The sound of the fight echoed through the room, growing louder and more intense as time passed. Lucien's muscles burned, his breath coming in ragged gasps, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. Finally, with one final, powerful strike, Lucien disarmed Vance, knocking the blade from his hand. The room fell silent, the only sound the heavy breathing of both men. Lucien stood over Vance, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and determination. "This ends now," he said, his voice unwavering. Vance, lying on the ground, met his gaze, his expression one of frustration and disbelief. "You think this is over? You think you've won?" Lucien shook his head. "No, but I've protected what matters most. And that's all that matters." He turned to Amelia, his eyes softening as he walked toward her. They had won, but the battle was far from over. There were more enemies out there, and the road ahead was uncertain. But one thing was clear: Lucien would do whatever it took to protect his family. And no one would take Adrian from him. The room was still, the tension in the air thick as Lucien stood over Vance, his breath heavy. But steady. The fight had been long and exhausting, but Lucien had come out victorious. Vance, once a powerful figure in Lucien's past, now lay defeated on the cold floor. For a moment, everything seemed to stop. Lucien looked down at the man, who now appeared weaker, vulnerable. His body was bruised, his breath labored, but his eyes still glimmered with a dangerous, calculated spark. "This isn't over, Lucien," Vance managed to rasp, his voice filled with spite. "You think you've won? You've only started a war." Lucien's eyes hardened as he stepped away from Vance, his hand gripping the hilt of his blade, ready for anything. "It's over for you," Lucien replied, his voice cold and unwavering. "Your plans are finished, and I'll make sure no one else stands in my way." Vance's lips twisted into a bitter smile. "You really think you've won? You've played right into their hands, Lucien. Your enemies are already moving, and when they come for you, you won't have the strength to fight back." Lucien narrowed his eyes, stepping closer to Vance. "I'll deal with my enemies on my terms, not on yours." With a swift motion, Lucien turned his back on Vance, signaling the end of their confrontation. As he walked towards the door, his mind raced with everything that had happened. He knew this was only the beginning. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. Outside the room, Amelia stood waiting, her expression a mix of concern and relief. She had watched the entire exchange from a distance, knowing how high the stakes were. Lucien had promised to protect Adrian, but Amelia couldn't shake the feeling that things were only going to get more dangerous. "Lucien," she called softly, her voice breaking through his thoughts. "Are you all right?" Lucien stopped in his tracks, turning to face her. "I'm fine," he said, his voice more strained than he intended. "But we're not out of the woods yet." Amelia nodded, her gaze softening with understanding. She knew this fight wasn't over. They had barely scratched the surface of what was to come. "What now?" she asked, stepping closer. Lucien's gaze hardened as he looked back at Vance, who was slowly getting to his feet. "We get out of here. We keep moving. The moment we stop, they'll find us. And I won't let them take Adrian." He turned and made his way toward the exit, with Amelia close behind him. As they stepped outside, the cold night air hit them like a wall. The city seemed quieter than it had in days, as if the entire world was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Lucien could feel the weight of the night settling over him, the shadows seeming to stretch further than usual. Every step they took felt like it was being watched. "We need to find a safe place," Lucien said, his voice barely above a whisper. Amelia nodded, glancing around nervously. "Where will we go?" Lucien didn't answer immediately. He didn't know where they would go, but he knew one thing for sure. They had to keep moving. The moment they stopped, they would be vulnerable. And Lucien wasn't about to let his family become targets. "I know someone," Lucien said after a pause. "Someone who can help us stay off the radar." "Who?" Amelia asked, raising an eyebrow. "A contact," Lucien replied cryptically. "Someone I trust. For now, that's all we need." They walked in silence for a while, the only sound their footsteps echoing in the empty street. As they neared their destination, Lucien's mind raced. The war Vance had mentioned, the enemies who were already moving, were all too real. Lucien could feel the impending danger closing in on them. But he couldn't let it stop him. Not when his family was at stake. When they finally reached the old, nondescript building where Lucien's contact was waiting, Lucien paused at the door. He turned to Amelia, his expression serious. "Stay close," he said quietly. Amelia nodded, her face set with determination. She had been through so much already, but Lucien could see the resolve in her eyes. She wasn't afraid. Not anymore. Together, they walked inside. The dimly lit interior of the building was far quieter than the outside world, the air thick with a sense of secrecy. They were led through a narrow hallway, past rooms that seemed to hum with the faint whispers of others who had come here, seeking refuge. Finally, they arrived at a small, secure room where a man was waiting. He was tall, with a rough, weathered look, but there was a familiarity in his eyes when he saw Lucien. "Lucien," the man said with a nod. "I didn't expect to see you here not like this." Lucien nodded back. "I need your help. We're being hunted." The man's gaze flickered to Amelia and Adrian, then back to Lucien. "I figured as much," he said gruffly. "But I'll help you. Just know this. Once you're in, there's no going back. You'll be on their radar for good." Lucien looked at him, his jaw set. "We don't have a choice. If we don't act now, we'll never have another chance." The man studied him for a moment before nodding. "All right, we'll do this your way. But remember, Lucien, you're not just fighting for yourself anymore. You're fighting for your son. And that's a war worth winning." Lucien's gaze softened, though the weight of the situation was never far from his mind. He had promised to protect Adrian, to keep his family safe. And now, it was time to see that promise through. With a deep breath, Lucien prepared for the next phase of their journey, knowing that the real battle was only just beginning. The air inside the dimly lit room was thick with anticipation. Lucien could feel the tension growing as he looked around, trying to gauge the situation. They were in a safe house now, but the feeling of being hunted never quite left him. He glanced at Amelia, who was holding Adrian close, her eyes filled with a mix of worry and determination. Lucien couldn't help but wonder how much longer they could keep running. Every move they made felt like it was being watched, every step a potential trap waiting to snap shut around them. The man who had promised to help them stood in front of a table covered with maps and papers, his expression serious. "You've come to the right place," he said, his voice low and steady. "But we have a lot of work to do. The enemies you're up against are powerful, and they won't stop until they have what they want." Lucien's gaze hardened. "I'm not here to negotiate," he said, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. "I'm here to make sure my son is safe, and I'll do whatever it takes to protect him." The man nodded, unfazed by the intensity in Lucien's tone. "I know you will," he said, his eyes flickering to Amelia and Adrian. "But you need to understand that this isn't just about you. It's about your son's future, and the future of your bloodline. These enemies aren't just targeting you. They want to destroy everything you've built. They want to erase your legacy." Amelia's face paled as she listened, but Lucien didn't take his eyes off the man. "What's the plan?" he asked. "How do we stop them?" The man paused, taking a breath before responding. "It's going to take all of us working together," he said, his tone steady but filled with urgency. "You'll need to gather your allies. You'll need to call in favors, and you'll need to be prepared to fight on all fronts. But most importantly, you'll need to keep Adrian hidden, keep him safe. He's the key to everything. If they get to him, it's over. They'll use him to destroy you." Lucien's heart clenched at the thought of anyone touching his son. Adrian was just a child, his son. Lucien had already lost so much in his life, but he would not lose this. Not again. "Where do we start?" Lucien asked, his voice low but firm. The man didn't hesitate. "We start by making sure you have the resources you need. Weapons, allies, information. You need to know your enemy, and you need to be prepared for whatever they throw at you." Lucien nodded, his mind already running through the list of people he could trust, the ones he could count on. It wasn't many, but it was enough. It had to be. "And what about Vance?" Lucien asked, the question slipping out before he could stop it. The man's expression flickered, but he quickly masked it. "Vance is a problem," he said simply. "He's too dangerous to ignore. But right now, your focus needs to be on Adrian. We deal with Vance later." Lucien's jaw tightened at the mention of Vance. He had known for a long time that Vance would be a problem, but hearing the man's words only confirmed his suspicions. Vance had been playing a long game, and Lucien had no doubt that his former ally was already making moves to turn the tide in his favor. "I'll deal with Vance," Lucien said, his voice full of resolve. "But right now my priority is my son, and I will not let anyone take him from me." Amelia moved closer to Lucien, her eyes filled with a mix of worry and trust. "We're in this together, right?" she asked her, voice barely above a whisper. Lucien turned to her, his gaze softening. "Always," he said, his voice low but steady. "We're in this together." The man at the table cleared his throat, drawing their attention back to the task at hand. "I have a contact who can help with the resources you need," he said. "But I need to warn you. This is going to get ugly. There will be battles, there will be losses. But if you want to win, you need to be prepared to do whatever it takes." Lucien didn't hesitate. "I've already lost everything. There's nothing left to lose." The man nodded, a flicker of respect in his eyes. "Then let's get started." The plan was set in motion, and Lucien knew that they were on the verge of something monumental. He wasn't sure how it would end, but he knew one thing for certain. He would fight with everything he had to protect his family, no matter the cost. As the meeting continued, Lucien's mind kept returning to Adrian, the child he had never known, now his reason for fighting. He couldn't afford to fail him. Amelia's voice broke through his thoughts again. "Lucien," she said, her voice soft but filled with concern. "Are we going to be okay?" Lucien met her gaze, his expression filled with determination. "We will be," he said firmly. "We're going to make it through this. Together." The path ahead was uncertain, the dangers many, but Lucien knew that with Amelia and Adrian by his side, he could face whatever came their way. This fight was just beginning, and Lucien would stop at nothing to protect his family. The battle had been long, the weight of their choices heavier than ever. Lucien stood in the center of the room, his hands trembling with both exhaustion and relief. His plan had worked. The fight was over. His enemies had been driven back, their power diminished, but the cost had been steep. They had come dangerously close to losing everything. Amelia stood beside him, Adrian safely in her arms, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. The child, their son, now rested peacefully, unaware of the chaos that had just unfolded around him. The world that Lucien had known was no longer the same. The war for his family, for Adrian's safety, had changed everything. "Is it really over?" Amelia asked, softly, her voice filled with a weary hope. Lucien didn't answer right away. He wasn't sure if it was truly over. The price they had paid for victory had been high, and there would be no going back to the way things had been. But one thing was certain, they had made it through. They had survived. "I don't know," Lucien said finally, his voice low. "But we've come this far, and as long as we're together, we can face anything." Amelia's eyes softened as she looked at him. "Together," she whispered. Lucien nodded, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel so alone. He had always been a ruler, a king, burdened with the weight of his throne and the responsibilities that came with it. But now, standing beside Amelia and holding his son, he realized that the true strength didn't lie in the power he wielded. It lay in the love he had for his family. They were the reason he fought. They were the reason he had lived through centuries of darkness. And they were the reason he had emerged victorious. "We've won, Lucien," Amelia said, her voice stronger now. "But we can't stop. We can't let our guard down." Lucien's gaze turned toward the window, where the city stretched out beneath the night sky. It was peaceful now, but Lucien knew that peace was fragile. The world would never stop moving, and the shadows would always be there, waiting. He had fought hard for this moment, for the chance to protect his family. And he knew that the fight wasn't over, not yet. But for now, for this moment, they were safe. "We keep moving forward," Lucien said, turning back to Amelia. "We'll stay one step ahead. Together, we'll keep Adrian safe." Amelia nodded, her eyes filled with determination. "We will," she said softly. They shared a look of understanding, knowing that no matter what came next, they were ready. They had survived the darkest moments, and now they would rebuild, stronger than ever. Lucien knew that the road ahead would not be easy. There would be more battles to fight, more enemies to face. But he also knew that he wasn't alone anymore. He had Amelia. He had Adrian. And together, they could overcome anything. Lucien took a deep breath, his resolve hardening. "This is just the beginning," he said quietly, more to himself than to anyone else. We will make sure no one can take him from us again. We will protect our family, no matter the cost. As he looked down at Adrian, sleeping soundly in Amelia's arms, Lucien knew that he had found something worth fighting for. For the first time in his life, he had something to lose, something precious, and he would do whatever it took to keep it. The shadows of the past may have loomed large over them, but the light of their future was brighter than ever. Together, they would face whatever came next, and no one would ever tear them apart again. The story of their survival had just begun, and Lucien would make sure it ended in victory.